Welcome back. Sorry, I was chatting.
Surely not. Intuitive, enthusiastic, sparky, curious, quick thinkers, emotionally expressive. You don't die wondering.
So there is part of me that is really loving taking on the challenge of training for a marathon, as much as there's a part of me that goes, why don't I just stay at home in my slippers?
Getting out of the house on time has always been a nightmare for me, and I'm very proud of getting here early today. Thank goodness I did, because the parking was a nightmare. It was a bit of, why did I say that? Oh, God. And so I brought it up in the break as an example. And of course, Carrie...
I said, yeah, well, I've just moved on. I'd completely forgotten about it.
and that's exactly the point.
Yeah. And knowing that in reality, everybody else has moved on.
They don't care. Hiya, and welcome to part 2 of Carrie's radio show, where we answer that burning question of how the podcast came to life and delve further into our overview of ADHD for her listeners.
That sort of brings us on nicely, really. A sort of a bit of a dodgy segue there, but linking back to our podcast, the ADHD Connection. So because it was your idea, where did that come from? Well,
I was just looking through my notes here, and it says neurotypicals have 65,000 thoughts a day. How they measure this, I have no idea. ADHD is up to 90,000 per day. And as you just said to me, well, one of those thoughts was, I'd love to have a podcast or start a podcast. I think Carrie and I share this desire to help people help themselves. And that's sort of the background of the podcast. But I was going to try to appear on a different podcast, and that fell through, although it was looking promising. It didn't happen. And I was a bit down, and I was having a coaching session with Carrie because we coached each other. And we got to the point where I said, well, I was sort of thinking of starting my own. And I could see there was a sort of look in her eye. And we have these chats, whether we're coaching or not. We chat and we talk about all sorts of things. And the conversation's sort of a bit like this one, basically. They meander around and they're always interesting. And I sort of looked at her and I said, do you want to be involved? And you straight away sort of said, yeah.
And it took us a while to sort of figure out exactly what we wanted it to be, because we didn't want it to be... There are lots of people out there who do a brilliant job of giving information.
Yes,
and
like Kate Maria.
Yes,
and so on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And facts, and having experts on.
Tracy Utsuka, Kristen Gardner, all these people.
Yes.
They do a great job.
Absolutely. And there are brilliant books, as I said, Scattered Minds, Ned Halliwell's work.
Yes, everything.
There's loads.
Yes.
But I'm not very good at reading books because it takes a lot of effort. I'm listening
You're
to...
too busy to read.
or that. I do listen to things on audiobook, but I find reading a textbook very difficult, and taking information, you're much more
now
sort
I
of
never
analytical
used to be.
than
Yes,
me.
absolutely.
But we decided really that we wanted the premise of our podcast to be two ADHD coaches figuring it out together.
That was Carrie's strapline. Very good. And I just went, yes.
And that's really what it is. It is us talking about the things that we have found difficult and challenging that are because of our ADHD, and not coming up with answers necessarily, although we generally come up with, we work things out by the end of the episode.
By osmosis, it seems to happen miraculously. I was just remembering that originally when it was just me, I was thinking creative connection because of my job and everything else. And I was thinking it'd be nice to have this hub for people for creativity, because especially with lots of people working from home now, post-COVID and everything else, and designers, you need that bouncing offness. And so I was thinking that's where it was. And then when we started talking about it, we realised that it was kind of bigger. So we've ended up with connection. Back to Ned Halliwell, he talks about connection being vitamin C, so vitamin connection for ADHDers, because it is just vital for us to feel connected, and the buddy thing. So for an ADHDer, doing something on your own might feel turgid and boring and wading through treacle. As soon as you do it with someone else, magically, oh, that's easy. So this is where it came from, and obviously it's our connection as well.
Absolutely. And we sort of, the 3 episodes that are out so far, the first one, we talk about the diagnosis process that we both went through. So similar to what we've talked about today, but also things like shame. Now, shame can be huge for people with ADHD. Well, for lots of people, but for people with ADHD. Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about that?
Oh, it's what I call it the look. So especially when you're a kid or a teenager, and you're full of enthusiasm, as we are, and you bounce up to a group of friends and they're in mid-conversation and your enthusiasm gets the better of you and you blurt out something and then they sort of look at you. And I call it the look. I nearly said something else, but the look. And then you think, oh, and you want the ground to open up, or you blurt out something without really quite thinking it through. And it still happens now occasionally. And you just want the ground. Yeah. I did something this week, you know about. And it's like, oh, why did I do that? Why didn't I think it through? Why didn't I stop?
Absolutely. And that shame can really affect how you think about yourself. So a lot of people that we both work with, having ADHD has really affected their self-esteem and possibly caused anxiety and things in adult life because they lack that confidence in themselves to have noticed things, heard things. They assume, I know I spent years assuming that what I was going to say was somebody probably had already said it and I just hadn't been listening, and those sorts of things. And all of that can really affect how you view yourself. And as well as that, we talk in that first episode about the fear of being too much. What's your experience of that?
Well, that kind of ties in with what I was just saying in a way, because we are bouncy. A lot of, not all, especially the hyperactive side or the combined. People are drawn to our energy if they're drawn to it. And I relate, I think, a story about when I was with one of my ex-partners. And I have the experience of going on holiday and people would be sort of engaging with me and it would all be lovely. But then after a little bit, they seemed to like me to start with. And then afterwards, they'd sort of pull away. And I'd think, oh, not all of them, but some. And she said, well, you're out there, Nicky. You make an impression. I can walk in somewhere, nobody notices you. Because of the way you are and your energy, people see you. And some will love that. And the people who love it. But the people who don't, they just don't. It's not for them. And so I've sort of learnt, ish, up to a point to be able to sort of pull back. And I suppose this leads into what we were talking about in the break about masking.
Absolutely. So masking is something that a lot of people do when they're younger. You see it a lot with people who are on the autistic spectrum, and girls seem to do it more than boys do. And there's a thought around that girls are more socially minded. So girls, this is a real generalization, care more about what people think about them than boys do. That's in its sort of crudest social element.
Well, boys are more about things they do together. If you put them in a room, the girls will engage with each other and talk about their families, whereas the boys will talk about the things they're doing, like the Lego or the Meccano or whatever. I'm sorry, that's very old-fashioned, but
Yeah, and we realise those are real stereotypes.
Totally.
So everything we're saying is really generalised, and there are, of course, nuances and specifics within that. But so, for example, I used to spend my life looking around me and thinking, how does this work in every given situation? And just copying. And that in its purest form can be what it is, just literally copying what other people are doing so that you get by. And we see it in schools a lot. And, an astute teacher will notice that. You will notice when there are children who are just watching and copying, and some children can be absolutely brilliant at it, and it is very, very hard to pick out. But that masking can go into different, so it's being possibly different when you're on your own and quiet to how you are when you're out in public. You can have sort of different personas, and we talk about that in the podcast a lot, about how we've tried to evolve our own personalities and find out what our own personalities are separate to our ADHD. And in fact, the whole second episode, which is called Oh My God, I Am Barbie, is about that. It's that sort of personality inconsistency.
Yeah, we sort
of
touch on it in the first one and then expand in the second, I say.
And again, that use of humour we talk about, and how being the class clown, which some ADHD people can be, is it masking? Is it a way of dealing with a situation and covering over real emotions? And
adaptive. I think it's adaptive.
It can be adaptive.
For me, it was adaptive because I must have tried something one day when I moved schools again, and I had a chance to start again, and that was how I dealt with it. And I must have said something funny one day that somebody thought was funny, and I thought, oh, that worked. I feel part of the tribe.
And then our third episode that's out at the moment is about the motor running at, help my motor's out of control. Do you want to talk a bit more about the motor?
Well, it was what we were talking earlier about, that feeling of being driven. And this actually is in the DSM-5.
Yes, it is.
Incidentally, the other thing I was trying to think of was time blindness. We don't have the feeling for time as much. And it can vary. So I'm very good at knowing how long a brochure will take to design and how long I've been doing it. But getting out of the house on time, and this is part of one of the things we talk about on a forthcoming episode, it just has always been a nightmare for me. And I'm very proud of getting here early today. Thank goodness I did, because the parking was a nightmare. So, sorry, just to go back. What was the question? Here we are.
We were talking about the motor.
The motor, yes. So the motor, well, because we've been away to the States recently and we both had to do lots of packing and organising and everything else, as well as our jobs and the podcast and everything else, it was that feeling that I've just got so much going on inside this little head, and what am I going to do next? Oh, God.
And we were talking about how it physically, you can feel that in your body.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
not just a mental feeling, that actually our bodies start really responding to that feeling. And we really explore that. And we're very honest, aren't we, in
Yes.
the podcast about how we feel and
Yes.
things that we find uncomfortable.
Yes.
So have you had any feedback yet?
Yes, and we're very proud to say that so far we've had about 6,200 downloads, which is phenomenal. But we'd always like some more.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, mainly because we've looked at it, apart from the just, it's a precious, shiny thing to do. It's a nice thing to do. It's that we want to get it out there, and it's the same sort of reasons that we coach. It falls in the same category. And so to get feedback, let me just look what we had this week. One of them was from a teacher who's saying autism and ADHD are massively underdiagnosed in girls and children and teens. And she said, I'll listen, thank you. So that's the teacher talking. And this is one from somebody we both know who said, I am loving this, ladies. My husband's recently been diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and everything that helps us unpick and understand it all is gratefully received right now. Thank you so much. And I had this sort of tingly...
Yeah.
Slightly tearful feeling when I read that, because that's why we're doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also for some people, we've had one review that said, I've really loved listening to this podcast. There were so many things you were talking about that resonated with me. And does that mean that I have ADHD? And they it's sort of affirmed things for them and made them start questioning being on their own journey. Yeah. So if you would like to listen to it, do you want to share where they can find it and what it's called?
You can find it anywhere that shares podcasts, I think, pretty much. I mean, obviously Apple or Spotify or YouTube, it's on now. For some reason, Apple has decided it's the ADHD Connection with Nicky Ship and Carrie Overton. So it'll say that. That's not how we originally named it, but it's up there for that now. And there's a very jaunty logo, which somebody I know very well designed. Oh, that was me. But no, that's up there.
Yeah, with a pink and blue logo. So if you are interested and want to find out a bit more and just hear us sort of discuss in detail the aspects of our own life, that is in there. So we're going to take a break now. And then after that, we're going to start looking at some of the strategies that you may find useful to use if you are experiencing ADHD or ADHD type symptoms. Welcome back. Sorry, I was chatting.
Surely not.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. We're having a special today on ADHD. Nicky, you were just saying something to me.
I was, yes. It was very interesting. I'm going to give you a very hot off the press example of ADHD RSD. So we were talking about it earlier.
That's rejection
sensitive dysphoria, where emotional stuff is hard to deal with. It's tricky. So just before the break, my mouth sort of wandered off on its own and said something about the logo and, who could have done that? And, well, that'll be me. And it was meant as a jovial thing. It was meant to be a joke. And when it came out, my ears heard it as, oh, you're being big-headed. Why did you need to say that? And I looked at Carrie and she was busy doing something. And so I didn't get any feedback. So I thought, I did mess that up. And even at my advanced age, with all my experience as a coach, I still went into a slight? Was it a slight? Anyway, it was a bit of, why did I say that? Oh, God. And so I brought it up in the break as an example. And of course, Carrie.
I said, yeah, well, I've just moved on. I'd completely forgotten about it.
and that's exactly the point. Yeah. That's exactly the point.
That we will keep worrying and torturing ourselves, whereas actually the other person's completely moved on and isn't thinking about it at all.
And as I've said to a client just in the last week, what if it's not about you?
Absolutely.
And it's not because we're big-headed and self-centered. No. It's because we're worried about things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the difference is I noticed it and I vocalized it and I've now owned it and now I can let it go. And that's what we learn, and that's the power of coaching and stuff.
And a good strategy to share, actually, there. So we were talking about some strategies that people can use, but actually before we go into that, I feel like we've focused a lot on the problematic element of ADHD, the things that can cause difficulties, but there are many strengths as well. Do you want to talk a bit about strengths?
Yes, well, I'm just looking down at my list. While I'm on the list, I have a list of ADHD characteristics and strengths and challenges. And if anybody'd like it, it's available through my website. Just drop me an email through the website.
Do you want to share your details?
Oh, yes. My website is nickyship.coach. So it's Nicky, so N for November, ICKY, ship like a boat with two P's, SHIPP.coach, COACH. And if you'd like to go on there, there's if you scroll down the homepage, there's a bit saying, if you'd like the ADHD list of characteristics and strengths, etc., just drop me an email and it'll ping up if you click on it. And I'll be very delighted to send it to you. And it's got about 100 and something points on it. And it's not a diagnostic. But if you find that you resonate with the majority of things on there, then you can draw some conclusions and at least it will help you narrow things down a little bit. Obviously, it doesn't deal with all the other things they rule out when you have a proper diagnosis. But it's the sort of thing that I started looking at when I started on my journey. And it all comes from really good sources, like Ned Halliwell and Gabor Mate and all the other people we've talked about. So, and I reference some of those in the thing. So it's a PDF if anybody'd like it. So looking at the strengths.
You were talking about hunters and farmers.
Oh,
now
hunters
that's on
and
this.
farmers.
Can you explain what that means?
There's a chap in 1997, I think, my brain remembers, a chap called Tom Hartman, Thom Hartman. I think it's double N. He wrote a book that's got a long title, but bits of it say hunters and farmers. And his thesis, and it's completely just a made-up thing, but it makes perfect sense to most of the ADHDers that I've ever mentioned this to, is that if you imagine 20,000 years ago on the African plains, the tribe would decide it was running out of food. So maybe 5 of them would go out at 5 o'clock in the morning, next morning, and they would be looking for some poor animal that was going to be lunch and so on. And they'd go out and they'd need to be very aware of distractions. So a twig snapping could mean lunch, or it could mean their lunch. So another tribe would be trying to kill them or whatever. So they'd be very, very distractible. They would then find a group of animals. A couple of them would go around the other side, drive the animal towards the other 2 who'd have spears ready, and they'd have to go from wide focus to very focused. And one of our ADHD things is hyperfocus. We go well into hyperfocus. And so you go from wide focus to hyperfocus to get the spear into the animal at the right time. They then put it on the pole, take it home and skin it. And then they sort of wander about for a few days and they might go and pick some berries. But they're eating, they do creative things with the skins, they make clothes, they paint the walls with lovely paintings, whatever they do. And I'm obviously minimising all the negativity of being a cave person. And then at some point they will go out again and because they'll run out of food and off they'll go. And it's all very ad hoc. That, if you like, is the ADHD mind. Whiz forward to 10,000 years ago or whatever, and suddenly farming comes in. And farming involves very broadly, as we're doing broadly things today, very broadly, getting up at the same time to do with the weather every day, going out doing backbreaking work in the field. You're probably on your own, you're not with your buddies. You might have a horse if you're lucky, your buddy's in the next field. And then you come in when it gets dark and you eat your food and you go to bed. No, exhausted, no time for that. And that's the Industrial Revolution as well. And so the way life is set up is that is the way it's set up, and it doesn't suit the ADHD mind. We want to be with people, we want to be creative, we want to feel free. There's an awful lot of entrepreneurs who are ADHD.
Yeah, there's an interesting list of names in your list here of sort of famous people: Richard Branson, Tony Robbins, Stephen Hawking, Albert Einstein,
Walt Disney.
Amongst others, Jamie Oliver. And I think that's the thing for people with ADHD. There is a need for novelty, challenge, movement. But all of those things that are pluses can become challenges as well. So that need, for example, for novelty, we've talked about before about that. I am only comfortable when I'm slightly out of my comfort zone.
Yes.
I like to take on new challenges, even if I don't really have time to do them. So I'm training for a marathon at the moment. I don't really have time to do it. And I wasn't really sure I wanted to do it. I always said I never would. But then I love a challenge. So there is part of me that is really loving taking on the challenge of training for a marathon, as much as there's a part of me that goes, why don't I just stay at home in my slippers? But I know that actually I wouldn't, I'd drive my family mad if I was staying at home because I can't do that. I like to be really busy.
Yes.
But with that comes burnout.
Yes.
And ADHD burnout is another experience that is shared by a lot of people, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think the thing about the strengths, again, back to Ned Halliwell and others, is that for every challenge there's a strength. So creativity, as Ned, as if I know him, dear Ned, would say, is creativity is distraction gone right. And I know from being a designer, it's like you're on your way to do one design, you think, oh, that's an idea, and I'll try mocking that up, and then you suddenly think, oh, what's that? Oh, that's interesting. Let's go over there. And that's the creative side. And so every single one, so I've got a list here, we won't go through the whole lot, but innovative, daydreamers, flexible, entrepreneurial, great leaders, inspirational, risk takers. So a lot of ADHDs, especially boys, drive far too fast. That's, and I used to. And problem solvers, we look at things from a totally different point of view. Intuitive, enthusiastic, sparky, curious, quick thinkers, emotionally expressive. You don't die wondering. Empathic, definitely empathic, compassionate. Well, we learn to be compassionate because we've gone through a lot of stuff as a kid. And so you can see how, if you can see how somebody else is feeling, then it brings out the compassionate side of you.
But all of those things can have, I mean, again, the thing with the list, some people say, well, I'm not those things. And we can be them at different times in our life. And things like risk-taking or being innovative can look like not being settled in a job. Lots of people that I've worked with and on forums for people with ADHD that I'm part of, people will talk repeatedly about, I just don't finish anything. Yeah.
The 95%ers we are. That last 5% is so hard to get done.
I don't finish anything. I can't stick to one job. I find it hard to, that sort of stickability, which can be reframed as creativity and innovation, but in a more mundane, practical way can cause problems. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is that strengths can also make things difficult for us if they're not used, if they're not channeled.
Yes.
So if you can find it's finding a situation or a scenario where you work in a job that has variety and creativity as part of it. Otherwise, you might find that your need for creativity and variety looks like unable to stick at one job.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
It does. But it's also, I remember Nicky Campbell on 5 Live, he was talking the other day and he was saying, because he's ADHD, and he was saying that he's in the perfect job for him. And that's how he manages to function so well, because he's found the perfect job. And I would say same for me and possibly the same for you, because I remember you saying that you learnt to hone your structure through your job.
Teaching.
Your scaffolding.
Yes, very, very much so. So teaching was a perfect job for me in some ways, because it played to those areas of strength of creativity, innovation, excitement, interest, communication, relationships, all of those things. I loved that about teaching. But it did not play at all to timekeeping, organisation, planning.
You say that because when we were doing our course, you were much better at fitting it in a whole grow session, as we used to have to do. It's a model for helping people with coaching. And we had to do it in 30 minutes, which I found really difficult. And when we did it together, it's plain sailing for you, because you'd learned through the job.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. When I started teaching, I found it really, really, really difficult. And then through having a really good mentor when I first started, who gave me a lot of the time strategies that I've adapted and still sort of pretty much use now, that's where I feel I've learnt timekeeping. And 20 years of doing the job, you get a feel for it. So, it is about, and that's what Nicky and I work with when we're coaching people, is sort of trying to find And I guess this would be one strategy that I would give people is know what your strengths are as well as your challenges, and try and find spaces and places that you can use your strengths.
Yes.
And if you are in a place and a space that inhibits and causes you that restlessness, what flexibility do you have to move into a different field, or within your job do something differently that will allow you to use your strength?
Yeah, I'm going to mention another podcast here. I was listening to the wonderful Mel Robbins podcast, no relation to Tony, another wonderful coach, and she's very vulnerable in it and doesn't have all the answers, as we don't. I like to think we're the same, that we're vulnerable in our podcast. And she's talking in her latest one that I was listening to this morning about happiness and how to find it. And one of the things that she brings up is if you're in a job that doesn't suit you, and it sounds so obvious, but it's true, is that it's finding where you fit within and what fits you.
Absolutely. And so looking at Nicky's characteristics or learning about having that diagnosis is
on the list.
On the list. It's all about coming to terms that actually this is who I am. Right. Now I know that. How am I going to approach it? How am I going to deal with this? How am I going to live out being this person in the most successful way with this awareness of the things that I'm going to find difficult and workarounds?
Yeah. And it's also the avoiding the yes but. And just give yourself half an hour to have a magic wand. What if I had a magic wand? What would I have?
Yeah.
Which job, whatever it is. Sorry, I can see you.
And we were saying it's spending that time, as we often say on the show, it's spending time really thinking about yourself.
Yeah, allowing yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Right, we're going to have another song, some more adverts, and then we will get on to looking at strategies to deal with some of the common problems. So we're talking about strategies, and I thought if we can touch on two of the main areas that we both work with people, help and supporting them in, one of them being emotional regulation. Now, we touched on that earlier. What would you say? You referred to it a bit when you talked to
Yes,
it's
my true life confession.
Yes.
Yes, it's being aware that you're feeling something, which might sound a bit daft, but when you're in the midst of it, it's tricky.
Yeah.
So being aware of it, letting it be, acknowledging it rather than just trying to push it away, feeling it in your body. Where is it in my body? And ask yourself silly questions or strange questions like, what colour is it? And is it warm or is it cold? That sort of thing. And then you can identify how it feels. And it might be in your throat or whatever. Letting it be is the main thing, because emotion wants to move, emotion. So if you acknowledge it and let it be, and then breathing is always good. And then if you can, if it's appropriate. So I said to Carrie, because Carrie was here with me, I vocalised what the issue was, and get it out of your head. So it could be that you feel you've upset somebody. Well, ask them. I know it sounds daft, but we're scared of rejection, but it's better to deal with it. Even if you just write it down on a piece of paper or speak it into your phone, how you're feeling, or so it's going somewhere. And then it should start to shift.
Absolutely. And I would add to that about having an awareness of the story you're attaching to it.
Definitely.
So the narrative you're telling yourself. So for example, using your example, you made a joke about the design and felt bad.
Yeah,
but
I felt like I was coming over as being big-headed, or maybe I was being.
So that's the narrative you started telling. Everyone's
going to think I'm a big head. Yes,
absolutely.
Or arrogant,
and keeping that narrative in check and keeping it in terms of reality, and knowing that in reality everybody else has moved on.
They don't care. What if it's not about me?
Yes. People, I mean, I used to say this to children at school all the time, people think about us a lot less than we think that they're thinking about us.
Or than we do about ourselves. Yes.
Exactly. So before we finish, the other strategies I think would be useful to go into is about organisation. So people with ADHD often struggle with, because of that lack of internal structure, going about organising themselves.
Yeah,
would you like to?
Absolutely, because it fits in with the time blindness that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So planning and knowing where else. Some people can't visualise, many ADHDers can't visualise the goal in the future. So when the report is done, or whatever it is, or the washing's done, whatever it happens to be, and they can't visualise the steps to getting there. Now, you and I can do that. Thanks, Mum, for training me when I was little, when I was 10. But that is definitely a major area.
I would agree. And so it's looking at strategies of how to do that. And one thing that is recognised and recommended on any of the ADHD courses that I've been on is about, they call it salami slicing on some courses, but it's putting everything into the smallest possible chunks that you can do.
Chunking down.
Absolutely chunking down, because even something like tidying the house can just seem, it's too abstract and it's too vast. So make it concrete. What do I mean by tidying the house? Do I mean the whole house? Break it down into rooms, break it down into bits within that room.
Or a drawer, the kitchen drawer.
Absolutely. Or if it's in the bathroom, well, I need to clean the loo. I need to, clean out the bath or the shower, whatever it is, because that is when it will help you start. And it's starting that can often be a real difficulty.
Totally. Yeah.
It's just having an entry point for things.
Yeah.
And I think this, linking back to shame, this can be where shame comes in, because I remember not being able to do everyday tasks that were really basic.
I should be able to do this.
I should be able to do this. I should be able to organise doing the washing or whatever. But the washing is a great example for a lot of people. It's something they struggle with. So break it down and also ask yourself, what do I need to start? Have I, what equipment will I need? Well, I need washing powder and fabric conditioner and maybe a basket or something, and a washing machine. But, making sure you've got that equipment. And all of these things take time. And I think it's that acceptance. I accept that to make my life functional, I have to give time to organising and planning it. You've got an interesting view on or suggestion and strategies about to-do lists.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you I have a client, and she was saying she's got 17 things on. I asked her how many, and she said 17 things on her to-do list for that day. In fact, it might even been for that morning. And I said, so are you setting yourself up to fail there? Are you likely to get all those done? So she said no. And I said, so is that setting yourself up to fail? And she said, well, I suppose it is. And I said, so what if you just had 3 things and you only ever had 3 things or 5 on your list? So what we've ended up, or she's ended up doing, is she has a brain dump book or sheet where she just puts everything on there that she knows she's got to do. And it could be small projects. She could be project-based. So you're allowed, I think, in some of these things, you're allowed 5 projects or 6 projects. And it could be a big project for work, or it could be cleaning the house, or it could be decluttering the house. That's a big project. But under that, you've got subsections. So you can be as overarching, or you can be as specific as you like in your brain dump page that you do every now and again. But on your to-do list for the day or for the morning, you have 3 things. And they are very, very small. Like very small. So for me, it might be ordering a supplement. I did that this morning. And you get a little dopamine hit, which we haven't even touched on dopamine, but there's dopamine issues with ADHD. So you don't have the reward system going. Neurotypicals would normally do a big job. They call it eat the frog, get it out of the way, first thing. That doesn't work so well for ADHDs. So it's better if we do a couple of small jobs and then we get like the impetus and the dopamine going on that. And then we can make some progress towards the bigger things. It's not hard and fast, but it's so the 3 things. And then you were saying about then putting those...
Yeah, and sometimes I absolutely agree with you about having the sort of brain dump, because, again, it's knowing that keeping everything in our heads is really challenging. So I write everything down, and that's okay. And it's what we said about knowing yourself. If you know you have to do that, then that's okay. I know I need to do that. We have notes, I have prompts, I have my phone, everything.
Yes.
But then I use a diary so that if I know, for example, going shopping, I have to go shopping to get food for my family. Well, I will look at my diary, and rather than put go shopping on my to-do list, I will actually think, well, when am I going to do that? And I really spend time working out, when am I going to do that? When am I going to clean the house? Or when am I going to plan this radio show or edit it? And I make sure that I put those things into my diary. Because if I just had it all on one big list, it would never, ever happen.
Exactly.
Never get round to it.
Yes.
So thank you, Nicky, so much for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. I've loved it.
It's been an absolute whistle-stop tour of ADHD. It's been great having you along. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us on our ADHD journey. If you can spare a sec, a review or ranking would be hugely appreciated by us. 5 stars would be marvellous, but whatever you think. Every single one really does help. As well as on your favourite app, You can find us on YouTube and Instagram at the ADHD Connection _podcast. So we hope to see you on there. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.